I'd like to introduce Toby Trackman, who's the director of the film, and he and I will be talking for about 20 minutes, and then I'd love any of you to have a chance to ask Toby any questions that you'd like to put to him. I suppose I wanted to start with, where do you start with a film like this in terms of, we'll talk about the personal, sort of how it is to make a film like this, but where do you start with working on a project? Did you have a very firm sense of the film you wanted to make right at the start?
I think at the beginning, I definitely wanted to set out to make something that felt different. That was one of my kind of main aims at the beginning. I felt a huge sense of responsibility, obviously, taking on this subject and at this particular anniversary. But I was also very aware of the fact that there's been lots of other films around this subject that's gone before this. And so I wanted to make something that felt different and that offered a unique, kind of perspective on it. And I just happened to be, before this project, in Berlin for another project, and I'd been to the Liebkind Holocaust Memorial there. And I don't know, for those of you who haven't been there, it's an incredible physical experience because it's sort of very disconcerting. It's designed to throw you off balance and to make you feel lost. And you can sort of see so many different meanings in the structures that are around there. And then when this project kind of came to me, I was thinking about that experience, that very kind of physical experience that I had being there at that memorial. And that was the sort of the feeling that I wanted to kind of bring into this, that sense of keeping the audience off balance and slightly, kind of disturbed physically by that experience, because I felt that was a sort of very accurate representation of what it must have felt like.
And I remember you and I having conversations very early on talking about the mass of filmed Holocaust literature, let alone books and other things, and trying to find something new to say, not for the sake of it, but something that stood alongside that massive literature as a testament that would stand the test of time and that wouldn't feel, that would feel like a useful addition to that. But I have to say, even again on viewing it, I do stand by the fact that I don't feel I've ever seen quite all of those elements blended together in a film. And the way that you and our brilliant editor, Gwyn, treated the material of first-person testimony, Holocaust survivor archive, music performance, locations, black and white archive colour. It's an incredibly complex thing. How difficult was that to achieve?
Well, firstly, I have to give kind of huge credit to Gwyn in working that out, because as you say, like bringing all of those elements together and maintaining that sense that I was just talking about trying to make sure that the audience was disconcerted and off balance, but not lost and not confused. That was quite a challenge. And I think one of the things that we sort of wrestled with was how to sort of marry all of this together into a narrative arc that fit in within a sort of a feature structure, because all of our characters were our contributors, their stories all happened at different times, and so we always knew that we were going to be sort of moving around in time as well, even within the window of time at the camp. And so that was a challenge. It meant that we could never just sort of tell things sort of linearly, but actually that helped us because it allowed us ultimately to settle on this structure, which sort of led us through the before, the build-up, and kind of take us all the way through, for want of a better word, the sort of the journey through Auschwitz, and all of those elements were kind of useful in that. And
it is a film that sometimes very head-on and sometimes glancingly provokes some really deep questions about the nature of good and evil, about what it means to be civilized, about what it means to love music and be Joseph Mengele. And yet you never in the film try and suggest any answers to that, which is one of the things I really find most provoking about it, is that many of the films and the factual pieces that I have seen on the Holocaust feel like they lead you somewhere, understandably, very intentionally. And I feel like this film doesn't try to do that. It leaves quite a lot of space and quite a lot of unanswered questions.
Because I think kind of quite deeply that the whole thing is something that you can't ever really have a satisfactory answer for anyway. We have the facts and the evidence, we know it exists, but just trying to comprehend why and what that meant, I think, is something that, you know, is going to be forever ongoing. And I think when we started reading, you know, the memoirs of the characters, it was very, very clear that they all had very different opinions about what music meant and the fact that it was even there at all. Not that they were denying that, but just what the role of it was. And so very early on, it was clear that we couldn't say this is a film about how music did this or that, but it's a film about how music did all of these things and meant all of these different things for all these different people. And so I think it would have been wrong of us to have sort of come down on one answer.
For me, one of the most extraordinary moments in the film is where, and I know that it's not been recorded for broadcast, certainly in this country, before, that Adam Kopachinski lullaby that you choose to have performed in the grounds of the camp commandant's house, Rudolf Höss, who, I mean, anybody who's seen Zone of Interest will be aware of that place, and it's a sort of special place that it holds in the unique darkness of Auschwitz. I'm just interested to know why there and how you treated, you know, obviously a lot of this film is shot in the environs of Auschwitz, which is a sacred site, a site of a mass murder, and how you as a practical filmmaker go about doing your job there.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of considerations at play about, you know, behind all of the decisions about where we staged things. We had, the full cooperation and support of the museum, which was amazing. But one of the stipulations was that they were very, very strict about where the boundaries were about where we could and couldn't perform. And so we couldn't perform within the walls of the camp at any one point. And Commandant Hess's house actually sort of backs onto the wall. So there was a sort of a practical solution that was offered there, you know, at first. But I think also just the symbolic power of doing that was the real driver of that. The sense that we were going in there and reclaiming that space and taking it over again. And, you know, it's a sort of testament to Debbie, the producer, and Isabel, production manager, that, you know, neither of them balked when I said, let's put a grand piano in the grounds of Hoss's house. You know, and that was, you know, sort of speaks to the desire of everybody involved in the project to make things happen, because they all believed in the strength of that. And so yeah, it was one of the most powerful experiences that night, definitely.
And I also remember a very early dinner that you and I had where I was trying to persuade you to do this project, and I knew that I really wanted you to direct, and you understandably had some really major concerns about what it would be to work in this space and to spend over a year of your life immersed in the world of Auschwitz. I imagine there was some extreme cognitive dissonance at many points where you're filming in a place like that and having to work. And how did you balance the need to be a director who needs to make decisions and call things on the ground? Or in a way, was that a protection for you just to get through what it was like to be filming there?
A bit of both. I mean, I was very apprehensive about taking the project on for lots of reasons, but one of those being to sort of protect myself, you know, emotionally. I was very, you know, kind of apprehensive, as you say, about spending, you know, a year going backwards and forwards to the camp. And I think being there with a really strong sense of purpose and literally having a camera to hide behind gave me a shield. You know, I was there to do something, and that was very, very helpful. But there was a moment, I think, you know, on the one of the first day of filming, when Ricky, the DOP, and myself realised that we'd been in the gas chamber for almost 45 minutes filming. And when you visit there, you're sort of ushered through very, very quickly. It takes, you're in there for less than 2 minutes, maybe. You're just sort of walk straight through. And yeah, we'd just sort of found ourselves in this sort of very, very deep, as you say, like reverential kind of mode of working in almost silence. And suddenly we realised we'd been there for, yeah, as I say, almost an hour. And that was, we sort of stepped out into the light, realising what we'd just sort of been doing and experiencing. And that was quite a kind of a profound moment, definitely.
There are lots of interesting coincidences and things that have happened during the making of this film, one of which actually relates to Ricky, the director of photography, who... tell us about the story with the lenses, because there's some amazing camera lenses that Toby used in this project, and I think it was Ricky who sort of discovered this.
Yeah, so I'll give you the whole story. So generally in the past, I've sort of shot most of my films myself. And in the week before we were supposed to go to Auschwitz, I was really ill, and I just couldn't really kind of deal with it at all. And on the Friday, we were going on Monday, and on Friday we made the decision within the production that we were going to get a DOP in, and that I was going to have some help on the ground. And that was really, really short notice to find somebody. So I rang around all my usual people, and no one was available. But I got this recommendation for this guy, Ricky, who I hadn't ever worked with, spoken to, anything. So I rang him up on Friday afternoon, and we were talking, and we got on. And then I was talking about this vintage Soviet lens that I'd just bought myself, and I was very excited to use that. And he said, I'm going to have to stop you there, because if we're talking about vintage lenses, you're going to want to know this. While we were on the so he'd been collecting these vintage German lenses for years, and had never really been able to kind of get them to work with modern camera systems, and so had sold them on to Focus Canning and Number 9 Optics, who are also here this evening. And they had set about the process of re-engineering and rehousing these lenses. But whilst they were doing that, they were starting to research these lenses. And whilst Ricky and I were on the phone on the Friday afternoon before we were about to head off to Auschwitz, Ricky said, I've got to stop you because I've just had an email that you need to know about. And the research that Ed and Ben at Number 9 Optics had been doing had just landed in Ricky's inbox, and it revealed that the lenses that he had been collecting and that they were re-engineering had actually been made by a German Jewish woman called Laura Sternfield, who was a trained engineer living in Berlin pre-war, working for a company called Astro, who were a lens manufacturer in Berlin. And they made lenses that were used for cinemas and for scientific purposes. Anyway, so they discovered that this particular set of lenses that they had were made by this woman called Laura Sternfield, engineered by her, under house arrest during the Nazi regime, and that after finishing this set of lenses, she had also been sent to Auschwitz and murdered. So suddenly, on Friday afternoon, before heading off to Auschwitz without a DOP, I found myself with a DOP with a set of lenses that had been made by a woman who had been killed in the camp, which was, call that what you will, but there was an incredible, kind of moment of serendipity.
And to take, as you say, ownership of those and to use them for a purpose that was about bearing witness to what had happened was extraordinarily powerful. I mean, I was sitting in the edit all the way through, and another strange coincidence, my mum got in touch. In fact, my parents are here. Where are they? Hello, Mummy and Daddy. My mum got in touch with me a few weeks ago to say she'd been researching her father, and she sent me an amazing clip of him in the streets dancing the hora with his brothers and sisters in a town called Munkash, where they were all at the gymnasium. I said, "What are you talking about? That's in our film that we've just made." And I'd been staring at the only pre-war footage of my grandfather for months and months and didn't know that he was in it at all. And the strands of connection and memory around this film have been really extraordinary. I particularly would like to pay tribute, to all of the musicians here tonight, but particularly to Raphael Wallfisch on behalf of Anita, who sadly couldn't join us tonight. But your family and your family's support of this project have been absolutely essential, and you're right at the musical heart and the emotional heart of this incredibly important story, and we're just very, very grateful to all of you. I'd love to just quickly open up the floor. I know you've seen a long film, and I don't want to keep anybody here for too long, but if anybody has questions, if you'd like to raise your hand, I think there are some people going around with microphones. There's a lady over here. There's a gentleman at the back. Who's got the first microphone?
That may be me. Again, absolutely stunning piece of work. One question that came to mind was, how did you come about choosing everybody who wasn't Anita, the other composers, the other performers? How did those decisions come to be?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So when I started on the project, Debbie, who had been working on it for a couple of months, researching it beforehand, maybe even longer than that, sort of presented me with a huge database, essentially, of other composers. Because surprisingly, or perhaps unsurprisingly, there were a lot of musicians and composers who sadly were kind of taken through Auschwitz. So there was a sort of a combination, there's a sort of a matrix that we had to sort of look at, really. What was the music like, for a start? What was their story? And then also, were there any survivors or any memoirs or testimonies? And then when we looked into the music as well, what was the story of the music that we could tell? Or rather, not what was the story of the music, but what part of our bigger story could that music illuminate? And so once we'd sort of gone through all of those different kind of filters, that's how we kind of settled on them. Some of them were kind of quite obvious choices. Like, as soon as I sort of read about the Jewish death song and sort of read the lyrics of that and the story of that, it was immediately obvious that we had to include that one. But as I say, all of them had to kind of go through that matrix. There were some amazing pieces of music, but sadly, no one to tell that story, or it didn't really kind of illuminate a point. But yeah, so that was how we made those decisions.
And I would just add that, sort of to my point just before the film, that we felt this film is about bearing undeniable witness to what happened, and so we knew that we wanted those memoirs and records of people who had been there, and the sense of that sitting alongside Anita's first-person testimony, so that it wasn't just a memorial concert, but it was these musicians in their own words telling the story of what had happened to them. I think there was a lady over there.
Hi, thank you. That's a really incredibly powerful film. A slightly tangential question. I wonder if you happen to know what happened to Ilse Weber's little boy, Hanush?
Well, yes, we do, actually. So Uli and Liv, who were in the film, who are here, actually found Hanush in Sweden, where he lived. So he, after being taken on the Kindertransport to the UK, he moved to Sweden and lived his life there as a TV producer, of all things. And I mean, Uli's has the whole story, but it's quite amazing, really, because Ilse's husband, Vili, had survived and had the foresight to hide her letters and her songs, bury them in the ground at Theresienstadt. And after he escaped and survived, he went back and dug them all up. refusing to believe that she had been murdered, and spent years searching for her. Eventually, he managed to find Hanush and gave him the letters, and the songs, which Hanush couldn't bring himself to look at. And so they sat in his attic for about 50 years until he was brave enough to sort of face looking at them again. And then Uli told Ilse's story.
Thank you. I think we'll just do one more if anybody does have another question. Oh, there's too many hands. Okay, we'll do very quick ones then. I think I saw 3 hands, so we'll do super fast 3 questions because I don't want to keep everybody here too many days.
Very quick question, yeah. A friend of mine, he was his father was a resistance fighter, and he was captured in Dachau, and so he's also experienced the other side of the inmates, how they formed choirs, because they didn't have instruments and they did have nothing. But obviously, what they couldn't take was the voices, and so they formed choirs. And I was wondering whether you came across all the music that was happening in Auschwitz, the choirs rather than the orchestras.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously there's the little section in the film where we have the other survivors talking about how they sang to sort of keep their spirits up. One of the challenges is that, you know, practically there was very, very little that was written down or recorded, and so Francesco Latoro has spent, you know, kind of decades trying to sort of find and record all this music, as did Alexander Kulisevich. But yeah, there's lots of anecdotal evidence of that, but hard to really sort of pin that down to actual written songs.
Thank you. Our next question, please. It's hard to tell here. There was somebody around there who had their hand up.
Another question?
No? Okay. Then it only remains for me to thank you again for coming. It's a tough watch, but we were really honoured that you came and shared that viewing with us. So thank you for joining us. Thank you very much.
Thanks.